My name is Dr. Rob C. Thompson, and you're watching Maybe Magic, a show that asks, is this magic maybe? Today's question: are teenage girls naturally possessed with supernatural abilities? There is a long-standing belief among occultists and paranormal investigators that there's something magical about teenage girls. In the mid-19th century, modern spiritualism, or the practice of post-age of reason communication between psychic mediums and the spirits of the dead, involved mostly female mediums. Many of them started their careers as teenagers. As the scholar Anne Broad points out, these girls had an easier job of convincing their audiences that they were really channeling the spirits of the dead because they weren't thought to know much about anything. Girls were simple and therefore blank slates on which the spirits could write. They were also, theoretically, more emotionally and spiritually available. Well, these were all the stereotypes of the age. The first American mediums were Kate and Margaret Fox, whose house in Hydesville, New York, where they'd recently moved, was filled with the disembodied taps of a man who, answering yes or no questions, communicated to the family in 1848 that he was a peddler who had been buried in the basement. Although the taps sounded both with and without the girls present, the family determined that Kate and Margaret were best able to mediate the taps, and seance mediumship was born. A different venue for spirit contact was a trance lecture. At trance lectures, teenage mediums would channel spirits who possessed their bodies and spoke on a variety of topics, including philosophy and science. A jury selected from the audience then determined whether the medium had persuaded them that she was actually in touch with the spirit world. The fact that teenage girls were, as a rule, very poorly tutored on philosophical, theological, and scientific topics made them far more persuasive in this context. The association of young women with supernatural power goes back thousands of years in Western culture. In ancient Greece, women occupied roles of religious power as oracles. The oracles at Delphi were female, although there were also male priests who served Apollo in different capacities. It's difficult to say why the oracle had to be female. It might have been the union she was meant to achieve with the male sun god in order to receive her messages. The messages themselves could be a simple yes or no, they could be a choice between options placed in an urn, or they could be poetic and require further interpretation. Like the mediums of the 19th century, the oracle sat between worlds, sharing information across the divide. The Romans had the Vestal Virgins. Girls between the ages of 6 and 10 were chosen by the head priest or Pontifex Maximus to serve for a period of 30 years. The priestess spent 10 years learning her duties, 10 years performing them, and 10 years teaching them to the next priestesses. Then, after she retired, she could be married, and Vestals often were, because marrying a Vestal came with a nice salary. The Vestals maintained the everlasting fire sacred to Hesta, goddess of the hearth. It was essentially the state hearth of the Roman people, so there was a domesticity to their role, even though it was a significant state function. If the fire went out, they could be stripped and flogged by the Pontifex Maximus in a veiled space because their purity and virginity could not be subject to public exposure. If they defiled their virginity, they were buried alive, often in an underground tomb. It's possible they served as scapegoats when the empire underwent a spell of bad luck. The government figured one of the Vestal Virgins must have let the flame go out or slept around, or at least they wanted the polis to think as much. Otherwise, it was a pretty good gig. Vestals got special seats at the Colosseum and were invited to perform duties at major public ceremonies. They kept the wills of major state figures and performed at large public weddings, and, being servants of the goddess, they were socially independent, emancipated from the paternal control of their families. In the medieval period, a teenage Joan of Arc famously communicated with the Archangel Michael, as well as Saints Catherine and Margaret, who instructed her on how to break the English siege of the city of Orleans, a feat that helped her drive the English from France. A poor country girl, she managed to produce a secret sign for King Charles that persuaded him she was genuinely in touch with divine forces. She also persuaded church authorities at Vaucouleurs, Chinon, and Poitiers to assent to the authenticity of her voices. She located a sword hidden behind an altar, and on the road to Compagnie at Lagny, she resuscitated an unbaptized baby who had showed no sign of life for 3 days. But a female who garnered so much authority was in a precarious position at this particular time period, and, a year after the siege, Joan was given over to her enemies, convicted of witchcraft, and burned at Rouen. Moving into the modern age, in 1979, Alan Gould and A.D. Cornell published a book on poltergeists in which they surveyed 460 reported cases of spirits moving objects or making sounds in haunted spaces. 29% of those cases involved women as an agent for the phenomenon. 11% involved men. Most of these agents were under 20. Many of the more famous poltergeists, including Enfield, Amityville, and the Smurl family haunting, are dramatic and attention-grabbing, but unpersuasive as paranormal events. But that doesn't mean that there aren't impressive instances of female-mediated poltergeists. In 1960, Virginia Campbell, aged 11, was attended by a series of strange phenomena in Sauchie, Scotland. Campbell, who had recently moved with her family from Ireland, experienced strange noises around the house, including taps. Her pillow rotated and sheets puckered as if someone was sitting in her bed. A doctor tried sedating her, but the phenomena persisted. In Ireland, Campbell had lost a best friend who died, as well as a dog who she had to leave behind, and these traumas may have prompted a strong internal emotional reaction that led to her paranormal experiences. At Virginia's school, the teacher, Margaret Stewart, noticed Virginia trying to hold down her desk lid. When the girl lit up, the lid would open and close on its own. When the student sitting in front of Virginia got up to bring an assignment to the teacher's desk, the child's little desk rose off all 4 legs and levitated a few inches from the ground. When Stewart sent Virginia to see the headmaster about her trouble, it took the help of 3 children to shut the door behind her after she left the room. Virginia made national news. An African witch doctor wrote in with a cure for her ghosts. A woman showed up trying to touch Virginia because she believed that Virginia Campbell was one of the chosen ones of heaven. Society for Psychical Research investigator A.R.G. Owen could find no natural explanation for Campbell's taps or any of the phenomena described here. In 1974, Maria and Teresa Andrews, aged 20 and 12, established communication with a spirit calling himself Eric, who communicated much like the 1848 Hydesville episode with the Fox sisters through tapping sounds, in what has since been called the Andover poltergeist. Mr. Andrews placed bets based on the spirit's recommendations. A medium told the family that the spirit's body had been buried deep under the floorboards, and the spirit sometimes kept the family up through the night. A paranormal investigator, Barry Colvin, found that the spirit was able to guess with 80% accuracy the content of cards that neither he nor any member of the household could see. The taps lasted from Easter weekend until May 10th, and then never sounded again afterwards. So, getting back to our original question, it appears that some teenage girls are magical. Perhaps some teenage boys are as well, and women and girls of different ages, but there is a clear connection, statistically and anecdotally, between women, puberty, and magic, going back thousands of years. Maybe Magic is written and performed by Rob C. Thompson with video editing by Dan Rosendale. Thank you for watching Maybe Magic.